Welcome to the top 10 list of Vietnam in history. The list will explore the most important and interesting aspects of Vietnam's history, from the country's ancient past to the present day. From the early civilizations to the wars that have shaped the modern nation, each item on the list will provide insight into the culture and history of Vietnam. So let's begin. 1. The early civilizations of Vietnam. Vietnam history dates back as far as the Stone Age, with evidence of early human settlements from around 10,000 before Christ. By the 2nd century before Christ, the ancient Vietnamese kingdom of Ao Lac had been established, and it would remain until the 2nd century AD. In the early centuries of the Common Era, the Vietnamese people absorbed influences from the Chinese, as well as the Indian and Khmer civilizations. This resulted in a unique culture that would later become the foundation of modern Vietnam. 2. The Chinese invasion. In 111 before Christ, the Chinese Han dynasty invaded Vietnam, beginning nearly 1,000 years of Chinese rule. During this period, the Chinese imposed their culture, language, and administration on the Vietnamese people. This lasted until 938 AD, when the Vietnamese people finally overthrew the Chinese and established the independent kingdom of Dai Viet. 3. The Lai dynasty. In the 11th century, the Lai dynasty established itself as the first native Vietnamese dynasty. This period saw a great expansion of the Vietnamese kingdom, with the Lai dynasty ruling over the most country until the 13th century. During this period, the Vietnamese people developed their own culture, language, and writing system, which has survived to the present day. 4. The Tran dynasty. In the 13th century, the Tran dynasty overthrew the Lai dynasty and established their own rule over Vietnam. This period saw some of the most significant developments in the country's history, including the introduction of Confucianism and the flourishing of Buddhist art and architecture. The Tran dynasty would remain in power until the late 14th century. 5. The Lê dynasty. In 1428, the Lê dynasty overthrew the Tran dynasty and established their own rule over Vietnam. This period saw the consolidation of the country's political and cultural identity, and it was during this time that the Vietnamese people developed their own distinct culture. The Lê dynasty would remain in power until the mid-17th century. 6. The Tay Son dynasty. In the mid-18th century, the Tay Son dynasty overthrew the Lê dynasty and established their own rule over Vietnam. This period saw a great expansion of the country's borders, as well as the introductions of new technologies and educational reforms. The Tay Son dynasty would remain in power until the early 19th century. 7. The French colonial rule. In the late 19th century, Vietnam was colonized by the French. This period saw a great transformation of the country, with the introduction of new laws, economic policies, and infrastructure. The French also introduced their own language and culture, which would remain in Vietnam even after the French left in the mid-20th century. 8. The Vietnam War. In the mid-20th century, Vietnam was involved in the Vietnam War, a conflict between North and South Vietnamese governments. This conflict lasted for more than 10 years and resulted in the deaths of millions of people. The war also left a lasting legacy, with the country still struggling to heal from the physical, economic, and psychological damage that it caused. 9. The fall of Saigon. In 1975, the North Vietnamese army captured Saigon, the capital of South Vietnam. This marked the end of the Vietnam War and the reunification of the country. However, it also marked the beginning of a long economic and social struggle, as the country had to rebuild in an aftermath of the war. 10. Modern Vietnam. Today, Vietnam is a rapidly developing country with a vibrant culture and economy. Despite the challenges of the past, the Vietnamese people have managed to build a strong and prosperous nation. This is a testament to the resilience and determination of the Vietnamese people, and is a reminder of the country's long and complicated history. Thank you for watching this top 10 list of Vietnam in history.